An $85 million movie just shocked the box office. But is it telling Michael Jackson's full story? Critics say it shows the king of pop, but hides the controversy. Michael Jackson was never simple, so why does this film feel incomplete? Fans are divided. Some call it a tribute, others say it's a cover-up. From moonwalk legend to the most mysterious life in music. So, tell me, is this the truth about Michael Jackson, or just the version they want us to see?
Welcome to The Explainer. The brand new Michael Jackson biopic, Michael, has landed, and it's created a fascinating split. Fans absolutely love it, but critics? Not so much. Today, we're going to dig into how one movie can tell two completely different stories about one of pop music's most complicated and controversial figures. Okay, so right out of the gate, this movie is a total paradox. On one side, you have a box office monster. We're talking a record-breaking $82 million opening, driven by fans who are absolutely thrilled. But then, on the other side, you've got the critics who have just torn it apart. They're calling it a sanitized hagiography, which is basically a fancy way of saying it paints him as a saint, and that it conveniently omits the darkness.
So, you've got this massive gap, right? It really makes you wonder, what is going on here? What is this movie leaving out that has people so deeply divided?
Well, the answer isn't so much about what's in the movie, but what was legally forbidden from being in it. You see, the film's story just stops, kind of bizarrely, in 1988, right at the absolute peak of his fame. It feels like a chapter is missing, because, well, it is. The most explosive part of his life was just around the corner, and it turns out the filmmakers weren't even allowed to tell that story. So to really understand why the movie feels incomplete, we have to rewind the clock. We've got to go back to 1993, to the story that changed everything, not just for Michael Jackson, but for how we think about our pop culture icons. So, it's August 1993 and the news breaks. It's everywhere. A 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler has accused Michael Jackson of sexual abuse. This kicks off an absolute media firestorm. There's a civil lawsuit which eventually ends with Jackson paying a settlement of around $23 million. And there's a criminal investigation that gets dropped after Chandler decides not to testify. Now, right from the very beginning, Jackson's entire defense was built around one word: extortion. His team claimed he was the victim of a shakedown. They even released a taped phone call with the boy's father, Evan Chandler, where he reportedly said things like, "If I go through with this, I win big time," and that Michael's career would be destroyed forever. For Jackson's supporters, this tape became proof of his innocence.
And this quote from New York Times critic Wesley Morris just nails it. He wrote, "We've all lived with what it meant to have Michael Jackson be accused of child molestation." And he's right. No matter what happened in court, these allegations became a permanent shadow, a part of his story that would never, ever go away.
For a long time, things were quieter. The debate was still there, but it was simmering. Then, in 2019, it came roaring back, forcing a whole new generation of fans to look at his past. That reckoning came in the form of an HBO documentary called Leaving Neverland. It wasn't about the 1993 case. This featured two different men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who gave incredibly graphic, detailed, and emotional accounts of the abuse they alleged they suffered from Jackson as kids. For a lot of younger people, this was the first time they were really hearing about any of this. And here's what made that documentary so potent. It wasn't framed like an investigation trying to prove a case. It was presented as an act of bearing witness. It was just these two men telling their stories, in their own words. That approach forced you as a viewer to really grapple with their testimony on a purely human, emotional level. And just like that, Leaving Neverland threw that age-old art versus artist debate right into the spotlight. Fans everywhere were asking themselves this incredibly tough question. How do you square the music you love, the memories you have, with these horrifying allegations? It created a real crisis for a lot of people. Okay, so all of that history brings us right back to where we started. The new biopic and the giant mystery of why it ends so early.
So seriously, why would you make a movie about Michael Jackson's incredible life and just stop right before the most dramatic, life-altering event? Well, it wasn't some creative decision to keep things positive. Turns out it was all about the law and a whole lot of money. You're not going to believe this behind-the-scenes story. The filmmakers had actually written and even shot an entire third act that covered the 1993 allegations. But then, deep in post-production, lawyers for the Jackson estate found a 30-year-old bombshell, a hidden clause in that 1994 settlement agreement that legally forbids any mention or depiction of Jordan Chandler in a movie. Ever. Their hands were tied. They had to scrap the whole thing.
And get this, that last-minute pivot, throwing out the original ending and reshooting the entire last section of the film cost the production an estimated $25 million, a huge price to pay to stick to a legal agreement made decades ago. So you can see the tough spot the filmmakers were in. The movie just ends, right as Jackson hits the stage in his prime, and then this title card fades in. His story continues. It's their only way of quietly nodding to the fact that there is a much, much bigger story that they literally weren't allowed to tell.
So, since the movie was legally gagged, the public is left to fill in the blanks. And boy, are we left with a divided verdict.
I mean, just look at these numbers. The gap is staggering. The critics, who know the full story and what's missing, give it a rotten 39%. But the audience, who came to celebrate the music and the icon they remember, gave it an almost perfect 96%. It's like two different movies were released into two completely different realities.
And that leaves us with these two narratives that just can't be reconciled. For fans, this film is a beautiful tribute to a misunderstood genius who was a victim of extortion. For critics, it's a dishonest attempt to rewrite history. And then you have people like Dan Reed, the director of Leaving Neverland, who just sees it as people making bank off a man he calls very nasty.
You know, when you zoom out, this whole thing isn't really just about Michael Jackson anymore. His story and the story of this movie has turned into a battleground over a much bigger question. What do we want from the stories of our heroes? Do we want the messy, complicated truth, or do we want the celebration?
The movie, because of that legal clause, couldn't even try to answer that for us. And so, one of the most polarizing legacies in the history of pop culture is left totally unresolved, and ultimately, it's left in our hands to keep debating.